But we want to begin with the urgent breaking news regarding two of the world's largest automakers. Very soon, Chrysler will temporarily shut down all of its manufacturing plants and may very soon completely run out of cash it needs to operate. Ford is also reportedly taking emergency measures right now, shutting down some of its assembly plants. And this could be just the beginning of the end of these two automakers and the beginning of a nightmare for American workers. Let's go straight to CNN's Brian Todd. He's got the shocking details. What's going on, Brian?
Wolf, what we have is at least the Chrysler version of what's going on here. Chrysler saying, as you mentioned, it will close all of its manufacturing plants for a month starting this Friday. The Associated Press says that means about 30 plants total. The company says it essentially needs to conserve cash because of slowing demand. Chrysler says tighter credit markets are keeping would-be buyers away from showrooms. Dealers are unable to close sales. Chrysler estimates 20 to 25% of its volume has been lost due to the credit crunch, and that it will have trouble paying its bills after the first of the year. Now, a legislative plan to provide billions of dollars in stopgap loans died in the Senate last week. We've been reporting it for days now. The Bush administration said it might use its authority to give automakers their bailout from the funding set aside for that $700 billion overall financial bailout, but that deal is not done yet. Wolf, you'll remember when you interviewed Chrysler CEO Robert Nardelli earlier this month, you specifically asked him what would happen if they didn't get their share of the proposed bailout. His prediction, very dire.
If Chrysler doesn't get the $7 billion, what happens to Chrysler?
Well, I think it would be a tremendous impact on this economy.
Well, what about specifically Chrysler? Walk us through what would happen to Chrysler if Congress refuses.
Well, I think if Chrysler doesn't give us the money, the probability is we won't be able to get DIP financing, the debtor-in-possession financing. I don't think we would be able to go into bankruptcy. It could force us right into liquidation. What that means for Chrysler specifically is there's about 1 million people depending on Chrysler's success. So you'd end up with tremendous unemployment. You would end up in tremendous systemic impact on the financial institutions of the people who have invested in Chrysler. You'd have 30 million Chrysler car owners whose value would be depressed, their ability to get maintenance and service. You'd have literally 3,300 dealers, about 140,000 men and women who work at those dealerships. You'd have over 1,000 suppliers impacted. You'd have all of the accounts payable, the health care costs, the pension funds. This would be a huge, huge impact on this economy.
And we had been reporting last week and in recent days about the ripple effect. If any one of the big three automakers goes down, it's now a reality for at least a month, with Chrysler at least closing its manufacturing plants. Chrysler says operations at all the manufacturing plants will be idled at the end of the shift this Friday, December 19th, and impacted employees won't return to work until January 19th, possibly later. Wolf.
What about these workers' paychecks? Will they continue to receive pay?
From what we understand, Wolf, the union workers will still get compensated. This is really to save production costs. Chrysler, which is also the maker of Jeep and Dodge vehicles, considered to be maybe the hardest hit of the big three automakers in this financial crisis. It's clearly a disaster right now.
All right, we'll stay on top of this story. Thank you. I want to bring in Ali Velshi, our senior business correspondent. Ali, you're working the story right now. Chrysler and GM and Ford, Chrysler and GM, the most seriously impacted right now. Ford's got some major problems as well. But what are we hearing about these other companies and their possibly closing some of their own manufacturing plants?
Wolf, I'm in a car right now on my way back to CNN. I've spent the part of the afternoon with the CEO of Ford, Alan Mulally. Ford is the healthiest of the three Detroit automakers, but he made one very clear point to me, which I think you ran earlier in the show while I was in flight, and that was that if one of the other two major automakers were to go bankrupt, 70% of the cost of a car in the United States of these American automakers is from parts and supplies, and there's a very big shared base of suppliers. And many of those suppliers are working on razor-thin margins, and like the auto industry, they have been affected very negatively. In the event that Chrysler is shutting down these 30 plants, what that means is that cars are not being produced, new parts are not being bought. If those parts suppliers run out of money, they are the same parts suppliers that in many cases supply General Motors and Ford. That means that stops cash flow to those companies. All of these three companies are dependent on cash flow, on moving vehicles right now, while they're trying to conserve conserve cash on some level. That means they're not getting new cash in. So this is a very, very serious development. Chrysler says it has enough money to make it through the first quarter of the year, the first 3 months. General Motors says it doesn't have enough money to get past the end of this year. Ford is the healthiest of the three. It started the year as a profitable company, but has dropped off because of the credit crisis, people's inability to get credit to buy cars, like Brian was just saying, and the fact that people are being laid off. The ultimate effect, Chrysler has about 53,000 employees, but as Bob Nardelli had told you, that means about 1 million people connected to it through its parts and its retirees. When you add all three together, if there was a critical failure and all three were to fail, we are talking about 3 million jobs or more lost on top of the 2 million that we've already lost this year. So this is a very, very grave and serious development in the auto industry. And I just want to underscore that Alan Mulally, the CEO of Ford, told me they could probably have made it through 2009, but if one of the two other car companies were to go bankrupt, that could trigger a bankruptcy at Ford as well, because it will trigger bankruptcies at the parts suppliers, who then can't supply parts to Ford that Ford needs to keep its cars assembled. Ford is also announcing today that it is extending its holiday shutdown at all 10 of its car assembly plants in the United States. It's going to go, they were supposed to shut down until January 5th. All but 2 will now be shut down until January 12th. So this is a very, very serious and grave development in the auto industry right now, Wolf.
Enormous developments and enormous pressure now on President Bush to make a decision about providing this so-called bridge loan to these auto companies. Ali, thank you. We're going to continue to stay on top of the breaking news here this hour in the Situation Room. But let's move on to the presidential transition right now. The Obama and Bush teams